In 1940, Adolf Hitler dismissed America as a decadent nation of shopkeepers, obsessed with lipstick and stockings. 4 years later, his generals watched in horror as that soft army raced across France at an impossible speed, on its way to capturing over 1 million German soldiers. August 14th, 1940. A private screening room in the Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, Berlin. The air is stale, thick with the smell of cigar smoke and expensive leather. The only sound is the rhythmic click-clack-click of a film projector. On the screen, a black and white image flickers. Gaunt-faced American men and women, their clothes threadbare, exhaustedly dance in a dance marathon, desperate to win a few dollars. The scene cuts. A chaotic street in Chicago. Men in fedoras firing machine guns from a speeding car. Cut again. Wild-eyed couples, their faces slick with sweat, dance frantically to the discordant, primitive wail of a jazz saxophone. In the dim light, Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels leans forward, a thin smile playing on his lips. He makes a note on a pad. This is the raw material. This is the enemy. A nation of gangsters, degenerates, and starving hobos. He would later present these findings, and his conclusions, to the Führer. And the Führer, Adolf Hitler, would nod in agreement. It confirmed everything he had already written, everything he already knew. In Hitler's worldview, the American experiment was a catastrophic failure. He saw it as a mongrel society, a chaotic soup of races half Judaized and half negrified, incapable of the unity, discipline, or martial spirit that defined his new Reich. He had watched them wallow in the Great Depression, a sign of the inherent weakness of their decadent, Jewish-controlled capitalism. He read the reports with contempt. A nation obsessed with comfort, with movies, with lipstick and stockings and shiny automobiles. His generals agreed. They looked at the numbers. In 1939, as the Wehrmacht's panzer divisions prepared to rewrite the rules of war in Poland, the United States Army was a global joke. It was the 17th largest in the world, smaller than Portugal's, smaller than Sweden's. It was a tiny, isolationist force of less than 200,000 men, equipped with obsolete tanks that looked like tractors and biplanes that belonged in a museum. German military attachés in Washington sent back reports that were almost comical. They described an American officer corps that was more concerned with social clubs and polo matches than with blitzkrieg theory. They detailed an industrial base that was, in 1940, still struggling to build a single, reliable heavy tank. Hermann Göring, the bombastic chief of the Luftwaffe, famously scoffed at the very idea of an American threat. The Americans, he was fond of saying, are good at only two things, making razor blades and refrigerators. This was the consensus in the Reich Chancellery. America was a giant with feet of clay. It was a nation of shopkeepers, not warriors. Its people were soft, its leadership weak, its racial mixture a fatal flaw. When Hitler unleashed his panzers on France, and the French army, considered the most powerful in the world, collapsed in just 6 weeks, it seemed to prove his theory. War was an act of will, a test of blood and steel, and the Americans, busy listening to their jungle music and drinking their Coca-Cola, had neither. Even as America began to stir, sending aid to Britain under the Lend-Lease Act, the Nazi leadership remained unconcerned. The U-boats would handle the convoy pusher Roosevelt. And even if they did eventually manage to field an army, what would it be? A collection of coddled city boys, led by untested generals, who would surely break and run at the first taste of real, hardened Wehrmacht combat. They had no idea what they were looking at. They saw the lipstick and stockings, but they failed to see the DuPont chemical plants that could make nylon for parachutes. They saw the shiny automobiles, but they failed to see the Ford and General Motors assembly lines that could be retooled to build a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. They saw the Coca-Cola and the chewing gum, but they failed to see the logistical mindset of a continental nation that knew how to move, feed, and supply millions. They saw decadence. They were about to meet mass production, spring 1944, a vast marshalling area, southern England. You can't see the grass. From the air, It looks like a single, monstrous, olive-drab machine, parked fender to fender, stretching for miles until they vanish into the damp English mist, are the vehicles. Thousands upon thousands of M4 Sherman tanks, their new paint still gleaming. Tens of thousands of GMC deuce and a half trucks, each with a full canvas cover and a white star painted on the door. Jeeps, ambulances, half-tracks, artillery pieces, and mountains of steel mesh matting used to build instant roads. A young GI, 19 years old from Ohio, leans against a crate. He pulls a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes from his breast pocket, next to a waterproof bag holding a letter from his girl. He clicks a Zippo lighter, drinks from a green bottle of Coca-Cola, and trades a Hershey's chocolate bar with a friend for a pack of chewing gum. This is exactly the scene Hitler had imagined. A soldier surrounded by consumer comforts, a soft man from a soft nation. What Hitler couldn't see was the math. This one soldier was the tip of a spear forged in a fire the Reich couldn't comprehend. He was one of 8.3 million men in the United States Army. In 1939, it had 189,000. Now, it was a force larger than the entire population of many European countries, and it had been conjured from nothing in less than 48 months. When the news of Pearl Harbor had cracked across the radio waves, the American giant had not just woken up, it had stood up, and in doing so, blotted out the sun. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had called for 50,000 airplanes, 125,000 tanks. His own advisors thought the numbers were insane, pure propaganda. The Germans had laughed. They weren't laughing now. The auto plants in Detroit, the ones Goering mocked for making refrigerators, had stopped making civilian cars almost overnight. The Chrysler Corporation, which had made Plymouths, was now pushing 25,000 Sherman and Pershing tanks off its assembly lines. Ford, master of the production line, built the Willow Run factory. It was a single building, a mile long, that took in raw aluminum at one end and rolled out a finished B-24 Liberator bomberone of the largest aircraft in the world every 63 minutes. The decadent women, who had supposedly only cared for lipstick and nylon stockings. They were now Rosie the Riveter. They were welding the hulls of Liberty ships in Mobile, Alabama, and wiring the instrument panels of P-51 Mustangs in California. American shipyards, like the one run by Henry J. Kaiser, were no longer building ships. They were assembling them from prefabricated modules. They went from laying a keel to launching a 10,000-ton cargo vessel in 4 days. This was the American impossibility. It wasn't blitzkrieg, which was a tactical doctrine. It was logistics, which was a national identity. The Germans had built a superb army. The Americans had built an industrial system that built armies. And now, that army was here. It was an army of civilians in uniform, and they brought their world with them. They were, without a doubt, the best equipped fighting force in the history of warfare. Every GI carried the best rifle, the M1, Garand, the best food, K-rations, the best medical care, plasma and penicillin, and more ammunition than he could possibly carry. But the real weapon wasn't the rifle, it was the truck, and the spare parts for the truck, and the replacement engine for the truck, and the factory in America building more trucks. In the Wehrmacht, the horse was still king. A German infantry division in 1944 was still overwhelmingly reliant on horse-drawn wagons for its supplies, just as Napoleon's army had been. Their few trucks were a hodgepodge of captured French, Czech, and civilian vehicles, with no interchangeable parts. The American division was a machine. It was entirely motorized. It had its own engineers, its own mechanics, its own bulldozers, its own mobile bakeries, and its own ice cream makers. This was the lipstick and stockings army. An army that demanded comfort, an army that ran on Coca-Cola, cigarettes, and consumer goods, and the U.S. industrial machine, the most powerful economic engine on Earth, was dedicated to making sure they got it. As this Ohio farm boy stubbed out his cigarette on the damp English soil, the German high command in France was looking at reconnaissance photos. They saw the build-up. They saw the ocean of material, and for the first time, The men who had conquered Europe in 6 weeks began to feel a cold, professional dread. They were about to fight a nation of shopkeepers, and the shopkeepers had brought their entire inventory. July 25th, 1944, a shallow trench just west of Saint-Lô, France. The air is hot, sticky, and smells of sour earth and death. Stabsgefreiter, Corporal Heinrich Voss, a veteran of the elite Panzerlehr division, wipes the sweat from his eyes. He has been in France for weeks, fighting in the dense, suffocating hedgerows of the bocage. He has contempt for the Americans. His officers have told him what to expect. The armies are amateurs. They are predictable. They fight by the book. They rely on massive, clumsy artillery barrages that tear up the ground but rarely kill the veteran Lanzer who knows how to dig in. Voss has fought the British at Caen and the Russians at Kursk. He is not afraid of shopkeepers. He hears it at 8 a.m. A low, distant hum, not the whine of a few jabos, fighter bombers, not the whistle of artillery, a rumble. Like the entire sky is a vast, empty stomach, growling. He looks to his lieutenant, who is nervously scanning the sky with binoculars. What is it? A young private, a boy of 17, whispers. The lieutenant lowers the glasses, his face pale. All of them, he mutters. It's all of them. Then the sky disappears. It is replaced by a solid, moving mass of silver. First come the fighters, waves of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, strafing and rocketing anything that looks solid, and behind them, a black river of steel. 1,500 B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators, flying in tight formation, wingtip to wingtip. Behind them, 3,000 more medium bombers and fighter bombers. This is not a precision strike. This is not war, as Heinrich Voss understands it. This is industry. This is Operation Cobra. The Americans, frustrated by the brutal, grinding infantry fight in the hedgerows, have decided to delete the German front line. They are not bombing a city. They are not bombing a factory. They are aiming 60,000 tons of high explosives at a rectangle of French countryside, 6 miles long and 2 miles wide. The first bombs hit, and the world ends. The ground does not shake. It explodes. It leaps into the air in a single, continuous, deafening roar. The very earth liquefies, heaving like a storm-tossed sea. Voss is picked up and thrown, his ears ruptured, his senses gone. He can't hear the bombs. He can only feel them as a continuous, violent pressure that feels like a giant's fist pounding his entire body. Tanks 4 0-ton Panthers picked up like toys and flipped upside down. Men are not killed. They are atomized, their bodies instantly vaporized, their component parts mingling with the dirt. Bunkers are not breached. They are driven 30 feet into the earth. The entire Panzerlehr division, one of the most powerful and decorated armored units in the Wehrmacht, is quite simply, and quite literally, erased from existence in 90 minutes. The bombing stops, replaced by an unnatural, ringing silence. Heinrich Voss, buried alive, claws his way out of the dirt. He is one of the few survivors, deafened, bleeding from the nose, his uniform in tatters. The landscape of his trench line is gone. It is now the surface of the moon. And then, he hears the new sound. A sound just as terrifying. It is the sound of engines. Not a few, not a dozen, but thousands. Through the smoke and dust, he sees them. The decadent Americans. An endless column of Sherman tanks, M10 tank destroyers, and half-tracks, not picking their way through, but rolling over the lunar landscape. They are not advancing, they are erupting. This is the army Hitler mocked, but it is not an army of men. It is a machine that runs on gasoline, on spare parts, on K-rations and Coca-Cola, and it has just been unleashed. Lieutenant General George S. Patton's newly activated Third Army is at the front of this column, and he is about to point it at the heart of France. The German line hasn't been bent. It hasn't been broken. It has been disintegrated. The hole is now open, and the race is about to begin. August 15th, 1944. a staff car, speeding down a poplar-lined road near Mortagne, France. Inside, General Feldmarschall Gunther von Kluge, the commander-in-chief of German forces in the West, grips the leather handle. The car stinks of stale sweat and his driver's fear. The radio operator in the front seat is frantically taking down messages that make no sense. "The Amis are in Le Mans," the operator says, his voice cracking. Von Kluge turns, his face ashen. "That is impossible. Le Mans is over 100 kilometers away. Check the signal." It is confirmed, Herr Feldmarschall. They took it yesterday, and we have reports of American armor columns approaching Chartres. Chartres was nearly at the gates of Paris. This was the impossible speed. This was the moment Adolf Hitler's entire worldview, his entire military doctrine, shattered. In Berlin, the Führer and his staff at the Wolfschanze were looking at their maps. They saw the American breakout at Saint-Lô as a tactical problem. Hitler, the master strategist, ordered an immediate counterattack, Operation Lüttich. He demanded his best panzer divisions drive west, cut the neck of the American advance, and trap Patton's army against the sea. It was a 1,940 plan. He was trying to fight blitzkrieg against the people who had invented it. He ordered von Kluge to attack. But when von Kluge's panzer divisions began to move, they ran not into a thin-skinned American flank, but into a wall. They were met by P-47 Thunderbolt fighters, flying artillery that came down in endless waves, firing rockets that could gut a Tiger tank. They were met by American infantry who didn't run, and while the Germans were busy failing at Mortagne, General Patton's Third Army decadent army was not slowing down, it was accelerating. Patton's columns, led by the 4th and 6th Armoured Divisions, were not fighting a front line. They were on an open road, in a drag race across the heart of France. They were advancing so fast, they were running off their own maps. They were moving 30, 40, 50 miles a dia, speed the Wehrmacht had achieved in 1940 only against a totally broken enemy. But the Americans were doing it while in combat, bypassing pockets of resistance, their lead tanks simply radioing the coordinates of German strongpoints for the fighter bombers to clean up behind them. This wasn't war. It was a high-speed logistical stampede, and it was powered by the single greatest logistical operation yet seen, the Red Ball Express. The American army was moving so fast, its own supply lines couldn't keep up. The tanks were literally outrunning their fuel. So the U.S. Army did what a nation of shopkeepers would do. They invented a 247 non-stop, one-way delivery service. They seized the main roads out of Normandy, declared them one-way only, and flooded them with trucks. Nearly 6,000 GMC Deuce and a Halfs began driving, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were driven primarily by African-American soldiers of the Transportation Corps, men who were forbidden from frontline combat, but who now became the lifeblood of the entire invasion. These men drove in darkness, under fire, hopped up on coffee, for 48 hours at a time. They delivered 12,000 tons of supplies every day. They weren't just bringing gasoline. They were bringing everything: ammunition, plasma, chocolate bars, engine parts, tires, cigarettes, and, yes, Coca-Cola. This was the machine Hitler couldn't see. The Wehrmacht planned for battles. The US Army planned for consumption. For von Kluge, the nightmare was real. His own panzers were now sitting idle, out of gas, while he could literally hear the rumble of Patton's endless columns driving behind him. The Americans weren't just advancing. They were encircling his entire army group. He and 100,000 other German soldiers were now being herded into a trap. The soft Americans, the army of lipstick and stockings, had just executed the most stunning, high-speed armoured envelopment of the war. They had become the masters of blitzkrieg. And the trap they had just set the Falaise pocket was about to become a slaughterhouse. August 19th, 1944. A muddy, crater-pocked road between the villages of Trun and Chambois, France. It is called the Falaise pocket. The Germans call it der Kessel, the cauldron. For Unteroffizier Karl Binder of the 7th Army, it is hell. The sky is a constant, screaming sheet of metal. He hasn't slept in 3 days. His uniform is caked in a foul mixture of mud and the blood of his comrades. His unit, once a proud grenadier company, is now just 9 men, armed with rifles, 1 MG-42 machine gun and a single Panzerfaust. They are not fighting. They are fleeing. And they are dying. They are trapped. The Americans, who were impossibly deep in their rear, have linked up with the British and Canadians to the north and the 1st Polish Armoured Division, which has heroically slammed the final door shut at Chambois. The Feldmarschall is gone. The generals are gone. The entire command structure has dissolved. All that is left is the corridor of death. A 6-mile-long, 2-mile-wide gap, that is the only way out, and the Americans are sitting on the hills above it, watching. Now, run! His Feldwebel sergeant screams. Karl scrambles from a ditch, pulling the heavy MG-42 with him. The road is a graveyard. It is a solid, immovable traffic jam of Wehrmacht hardware. Tiger and Panther tanks, their turrets blown open, sit next to burning staff cars and hundreds of horse-drawn wagons. The dead horses lie in grotesque piles, their legs pointing at the sky, alongside the splintered remnants of the German army's 19th-century supply line. And then, the sound. The decadent army's signature. It is a sound like a freight train in the sky, a ripping, tearing noise. Artillery, not the occasional shell, not a barrage. It is a continuous, rolling thunder that never, ever stops. The Americans are firing everything. They are not conserving ammunition. They are consuming it. Hundreds of M2, long tom, 155mm guns, positioned miles away, are firing in time on target barrages. Shells from 200 different guns, all fired at different intervals, land on this single patch of road at the exact same second. The earth erupts. Karl is thrown flat as a giant. Invisible hand slams him into the mud. His machine gun is gone, twisted into scrap. The men he was with are gone, vaporized. He stumbles to his feet, deaf, his nose bleeding from the concussion. He looks up. Jabos. P-47. Thunderbolts, the jug, diving in pairs. They aren't strafing. They are hunting. They are part of the cab rank, a system where fighter bombers orbit the battlefield 247, waiting for a call. And down here, everything is a target. He watches as a P-47 fires a salvo of 5-inch rockets into a Panther tank that is trying to bull its way through the wreckage. The 45-ton tank simply disintegrates. This is not a battle. It is a process. It is an industrial execution. This is the lipstick and stockings army, and it is grinding the Wehrmacht into powder with the cold, impersonal efficiency of a Detroit assembly line. Karl Binder stops running. His rifle is gone. His helmet is gone. His Reich is gone. He looks at the carnage, at the burning, screaming chaos. He sees a column of Mensum in the grey of the Heer, some in the black of the SS walking with their hands on their heads toward a ridge. On that ridge, he sees an American half-track. A young GI, no older than 18, is leaning against it, chewing gum. He isn't wearing a helmet, just a soft cap. He holds his M1 rifle casually, pointed at the ground. Karl Binder, veteran of the Eastern Front, survivor of a dozen battles, unclips the "Gott mit uns, God with us" belt buckle from his waist and lets it fall into the mud. He raises his hands. 50,000 Germans are captured in this pocket. 10,000 are killed. 2 entire German armies cease to exist. It is the beginning. The German soldier, long told he was the Übermensch, the master of war, has just been systematically dismantled by a nation of shopkeepers. And the great surrender, the great collapse, has begun. Late August 1944. The Wolfschanze, Wolf's Lair, Rastenburg, East Prussia. The air in the concrete bunker is cold and damp, even in summer. Adolf Hitler leans over a massive oak map table. The room is quiet, the thick walls muffling the outside world. He is staring at a long, red crayon line that represents the American advance. The line is wrong. It cannot be right. He looks at Generaloberst Alfred Jodl, his chief of operations staff. They are in Reims, Hitler says, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. How? How is this possible? Jodl, a man known for his icy composure, hesitates. He clears his throat. Mein Führer, the speed is unexpected. They are not following conventional doctrine. They are not stopping to consolidate. They just keep driving. Hitler's hand trembles. He smashes his fist onto the table. They are a mongrel army, an army of gangsters. They are led by cowboys. You told me they were soft. You told me they were decadent. This was the great reckoning. The moment the Führer's entire ideology collided with a gasoline-powered, mass-produced reality. He was stunned. The impossible speed was not a fluke. It was a system. While his own forces, what was left of them, were in a full, panicked retreat across France on foot, on bicycles, in horse-drawn carts, the Americans were advancing in a solid, motorized tidal wave. The numbers were pouring in, and they were catastrophic. In the 10 weeks since D-Day, the Wehrmacht in the West had lost over 400,000 men. Nearly 200,000 of them were now prisoners of war, and the American logistical machine was just getting started. General Feldmarschall Walter Model, the Führer's fireman, had been rushed in to replace von Klug, who had committed suicide. He arrived to find nothing. There was no front line. There was no Army Group B. It was just a disorganized mob of terrified survivors fleeing east. Model sent frantic, desperate reports back to the Wolf's Lair. He described an enemy that was unbelievably material-rich. He told Hitler that a single, minor American attack was often preceded by an artillery barrage greater than anything he had witnessed at the height of the Battle of Kursk. He described the impossible American soldier. The German Lancer was now chronically underfed, lice-ridden, and low on ammunition. He was lucky if he had one horse-drawn wagon for his entire company. The American GI, by contrast, was a king. He was the best-fed soldier in the world, receiving hot meals, fresh bread, and even ice cream delivered to the front line. When his boots wore out, a new pair was delivered. When his truck broke down, a new truck appeared. If his tank was hit, he and his crew bailed out, walked to the rear, and were issued a new tank the next day. This wasn't an army. It was, as one stunned German general wrote in his diary, an avalanche. It was an avalanche of stuff. The Americans were now liberating France at a pace that was, in its own way, becoming a problem. They were advancing so fast, the Red Ball Express couldn't keep up. Patton's tanks, having driven 400 miles, were literally running out of gas at the Moselle River. But even this was a symptom of decadent, impossible power. Hitler looked at the map. His Atlantic Wall, which was supposed to hold for a decade, had been breached in a day. The French army, which had held his army for 6 weeks in 1940, had been avenged by the Americans in a lightning campaign that also took 6 weeks. But this time, it ended with the liberation of Paris and the total destruction of his armies. The shopkeepers were now at the border of the Reich itself. They were at the Siegfried Line. And the number of German prisoners was climbing at a rate that defied all projections. 100,000, 200,000, 400,000. The decadent, soft, non-martial nation, obsessed with lipstick and stockings, had just crossed a continent, destroyed the Wehrmacht in the West, and was now preparing to knock on the door of Germany itself. The great humiliation was just beginning. November 10th, 1944, the Hürtgen Forest, on the German border. The world is green, grey, and brown. It is a wet, freezing hell that smells of pine resin and rotting cloth. Private First Class Stanley Sullivan, 20 years old from Brooklyn, New York, does not have a tank. He does not have a P-47 on call. He has a wet M, 1 rifle, 2 hand grenades, and a soaked wool blanket. His decadent K-rations are frozen solid. This is the Siegfried Line. The drag race across France is over. The avalanche of stuff has run into a wall of German concrete, dense forest, and the worst weather in 40 years. The U.S. Army machine, so brilliant on the open roads, has stalled. Here, in the Hürtgen, the tanks are useless, confined to muddy, mine-filled fire breaks. The impossible air support is grounded by solid, grey skies. The artillery, still firing its endless supply of shells, is ineffective. The shells burst in the tops of the 100-foot-tall fir trees, creating a rain of deadly wood splinters and shrapnel tree bursts that is just as lethal to the GIs as it is to the Germans. Here, the war is not a race. It is a grind. It has been reduced to a medieval, man-on-man fight. A Feldwebel in a German pillbox, a veteran of 4 years, peers through his periscope. He sees the Americans. They are not the cowboys he was told about. They are ghosts, moving slowly through the fog, their olive-drab uniforms dark with rain. They are fighting for yards. This is the battle Hitler and his generals had been waiting for. This is where the soft American, stripped of his Coca-Cola and his air support, would finally meet the hardened, fanatical Lanzer on his home soil. This is where the shopkeeper would break. They are attacking again. A young German soldier, a boy from the Hitlerjugend, Hitler Youth, whispers, his voice trembling. The Feldwebel nods. Let them come. They don't know how to fight this war. He gives the order. An MG-42 Hitler's buzzsaw opens up. Its 1,200 round per minute rip echoes through the trees, cutting down 2 of the American ghosts. Sully Sullivan dives behind a moss-covered log, the sound of the bullets cracking over his head like a giant's whip. He is cold, he is miserable, and he is terrified. He has trench foot. He hasn't seen a hot meal in 2 weeks. This is not the war he saw in the newsreels. Sully, grenade! His sergeant, a man named Chief, yells. Sully pulls the pin, the cold metal stinging his fingers. He doesn't throw. He waits. He is a soft American. He is a shopkeeper. But he is also a baseball player. He counts. 1, 2, 3. He stands, hurls the grenade in a perfect, high arc, and is back behind the log before the Feldwebel in the pillbox even registers the movement. The grenade explodes inside the pillbox's firing slit. The MG-42 stops. Silence. Sully and Chief and the other 5 men of their squad, only survivors of a 30-man platoon, jet up, leaning into the freezing rain, and continue walking up the muddy hill. This was the real impossibility the Nazis failed to grasp. They believed the American was soft because he loved comfort. They never understood that the American soldier expected comfort as his right, and when it was taken away, he fought with a cold, personal, and furious rage. He wasn't fighting for the Führer or for Lebensraum. He was fighting to get the job done, to kill the men who were stopping him, and to get back to a world where he could have a Coca-Cola and a hot meal. This was the American, the decadent civilian soldier. He was the most terrifying soldier of all, a pragmatist. In the Hürtgen Forest, the US Army paid a horrific price. Over 33,000 casualties. But they did not break. They were not soft. They bled, they died, and they took the Siegfried Line, pillbox by pillbox. And as they finally broke through, a stunned Hitler, his last hope of a defensive victory shattered, gathered his last remaining reserves. He was about to make one final, desperate gamble, believing his propaganda to the very end. He would attack the lipstick and stockings army, and he would aim for the one place they seemed weakest. December 22nd, 1944. A freezing cold cellar in Bastogne, Belgium. The air smells of wet stone, unwashed bodies, and medical antiseptic. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, reads the piece of paper just delivered by a German messenger. He is surrounded. His 18,000 menth, screaming eagles, are cut off, holding the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. They have little ammunition, almost no medical supplies, and are freezing to death in foxholes dug into the frozen, snow-covered ground. Outside, 54,000 Germans and 1,000 artillery pieces and tanks of the 47th Panzer Corps are pointing at them, waiting for the final assault. Hitler's last, desperate gamble, the Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, is in its 6th day, and it has been a stunning success. Believing his own propaganda to the end, he had launched his last SS Panzer divisions at the soft Americans in a sector he knew was thinly defended by decadent, green troops and battle-weary divisions. He was right. At first. The offensive had shattered the American line. In the initial shock, 2 entire regiments of the 106th Infantry Division, over 8,000 men, were encircled and forced to surrender. It was the single largest battlefield surrender by U.S. forces in the entire European war. To the German High Command, it was proof Hitler's theory was correct. The Amis were folding. But then, the impossible happened. The shopkeepers got angry. While some units broke, other small, cut off, isolated groups of engineers, infantrymen, and cook-shelled. They turned tiny villages like Street, Vith and Clairvaux into fortresses, holding up entire SS Panzer divisions for days when the German timetable demanded they be taken in hours. And at the critical crossroads of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne had been rushed in. Now, they were trapped. The German ultimatum, delivered under a white flag, was long-winded and classic in its language: surrender honorably, or face total annihilation. McAuliffe, a man who represented the decadent army, laughs. He crumples the paper. He and his staff debate the proper response. Nuts, he finally says. His staff writes it down. The official, one-word reply is handed back to the German officers, who are baffled. Does this mean no? They ask. The American colonel delivering it replies, it means go to hell. This was the moment the lipstick and stockings army turned. This was the moment Hitler's gamble failed. He had assumed the American soldier was a brittle creature of comfort. He discovered, to his horror, that he was a creature of will. And as the battered bastards of Bastogne returned to their foxholes, the other American army, the impossible machine, was waking up. In a cold, smoky tent 100 miles to the south, General George S. Patton had met with Eisenhower. The Supreme Commander needed him to break off his current attack and turn north to relieve Bastogne. His staff said it would take a week to plan the move. Patton, the ultimate cowboy, stood up. I can attack in 48 hours. The room was stunned. It was impossible. It meant disengaging 3 full divisions from a fight, turning them 90 degrees, and marching them 100 miles north in the middle of a blizzard. But this was the American army. An army of trucks, of endless gasoline, of a can-do industrial mindset. Patton did it. In 2 days, the Third Army was slamming into the southern flank of the German offensive, a feat of logistics the Wehrmacht could not even comprehend. Then, on December 23rd, the skies cleared. The Jubbos returned. The carpet of steel was unrolled again. Hundreds of P-47 seconds and P-51 seconds, the shopkeepers' air force, fell upon the stalled German tank columns. The panzers, which had failed to capture the massive American fuel dumps, were now sitting ducks. They were out of gas. The greatest German offensive of the war had been stopped by the 101st's grit, and it was being annihilated by Patton's logistics. Hitler's last army was now being systematically dismantled. The great counterattack was on, and the greatest surrender in German history was about to begin. April 1st, 1945, a muddy field near Lippstadt, Germany. Lieutenant Hans-Dieter Schmidt, 17 years old, looks at the man next to him in the trench. It's an old man, perhaps 55, wearing the grey-green wool tunic of the Volkssturm, the People's Militia. The old man is holding a Panzerfaust with trembling, arthritic hands. He is all that is left of Hans's platoon. For weeks, Hans has been running. The Wehrmacht in the west, shattered after the Ardennes, has ceased to be an army. It is a terrified, hunted mob. The Americans had crossed the Rhine at Remagen, on a bridge the Germans had failed to destroy. They had poured across, not as an army, but as a flood of steel, gasoline, and endless, well-fed men. Now, Hans is told he is in the Ruhr Pocket. He has been encircled, not by a small force. He has been encircled, along with 320,000 other German soldiers, the remnants of Heeresgruppe B, Army Group B, the U.S., 9th and 1st Armies. They had linked up, a pincer movement of overwhelming speed and power. The propaganda is still playing. Goebbels is on the radio, screaming about werewolf, commandos, and a final, fanatical stand. But Hans can see the decadent army. It is a line of Sherman tanks, their 76mm guns casually pointed at the village. They are not in a hurry. They are not afraid. They are simply waiting. A U.S. Army Jeep, its white star prominent, drives up the road under a white flag. A loudspeaker, mounted on the hood, crackles to life. The voice is calm, with a slight American accent, speaking in flawed but understandable German. Soldiers of the Wehrmacht, you are surrounded. Your war is over. Further resistance is futile. Lay down your weapons. You will be treated fairly under the Geneva Convention. You will be given food and medical care. Food. Hans hasn't had a full meal in a week. The old man next to him spits. Never. We fight. For the Führer. Hans looks at the old man, then at the sky. There are no Stukas in the sky. There are no tigers on the ridge. There is only the endless, arrogant drone of American reconnaissance planes, circling like vultures. He sees the lipstick and stockings. Army. A GI is sitting on the hood of the Jeep, one leg casually thrown over the side. He is chewing gum. He is eating a chocolate bar. He looks bored. This is the ultimate, most profound humiliation. It is not the terror of a Sturmovik attack on the Eastern Front. It is the cold, impersonal, industrial contempt of the shopkeepers. They are not here to fight a glorious battle. They are here to process a surrender. Hans-Dieter Schmidt, who had been taught his entire life that he was a member of the master race, a warrior of unparalleled spirit, slowly unslings his rifle. He lays it in the mud. He nudges the old man. It is over, Opa. The old man begins to cry. By April 21st, the entire pocket has collapsed. 325,000 German soldiers, including 30 generals, walk into captivity. It is the single largest mass surrender in the history of the German army, bigger than Stalingrad. And it is just the beginning. All across the shrinking Reich, the German avalanche is happening in reverse. The Wehrmacht is not just retreating, it is dissolving. The American machine, built on logistics and mass production, shifts its focus. It is no longer an assault machine, it is a processing machine. The Red Ball Express now delivers not just gasoline, but barbed wire. The GIs, who had been issued M1 rifles, are now issued clipboards. Vast, open-air prisoner of war, camps the Rheinwiesenlager, Rhine meadow camps, are constructed in days. They are not built for comfort, they are built for scale. Soldiers who had been told Americans were soft now stand in lines a mile long, shuffling past American medics who dust them with DDT powder and processing clerks who take their names. In Berlin, in his bunker, Hitler is staring at a map that is now meaningless. He is railing against this impossible betrayal. His army, his Volk, have failed him. But they have not failed. They have been outproduced. They have been outsupplied. They have been out-logisticked. The final numbers are staggering. As the Reich collapses, German soldiers are fighting each other to surrender to the Americans. They are terrified of the Russians. They know the lipstick and stockings army will feed them. By the time the guns fall silent on May 8, 1945, the Western Allies have taken 5 million German prisoners. Of those, the vast, vast majority are in American hands. The soft army that Hitler dismissed with a wave of his hand in 1940 has not only destroyed his Wehrmacht, it has captured it. The impossible machine, the one that ran on Coca-Cola, on nylon stockings, and on the unshakable pragmatic belief in mass production, has won the war.